Today, we're going to be taking a look behind the scenes of one of England's most famous families, the Beckhams. We're going to discuss every Beckham story over the last almost 4 decades, along with every secret they've wanted to keep under wraps. From David's headline-making alleged affairs to the claims that things aren't as perfect as the Beckhams want you to believe, as well as the story that David and Victoria are desperately trying to bury right now, their family feud. David and Victoria's oldest son, Brooklyn Beckham, and his wife Nicole Peltz are fighting with David, Victoria, and the other Beckham children, and the feud has blown up over the summer when Brooklyn and Nicola fully separated themselves from the Beckhams and made it clear they weren't welcome in their lives. Nicola, who's the daughter of a billionaire, married Brooklyn 3 years ago, and there have been nothing but problems between Victoria and Nicola ever since. Finally, we'll also cover how David and Victoria and Brooklyn and Nicola have been using the paparazzi and media against one another, and how one side has been leaking family secrets to hurt the other. So sit back, relax, grab a drink and a snack, and let's dive in to the secrets, lies, affairs, allegations, and feuds of England's most famous celebrity family, the Beckhams. David and Victoria Beckham are some of the most beloved British celebrities of all time, and while they have had their ups and downs, they have carefully treaded the line of keeping a lot of their private lives behind closed doors, but sharing enough with their fans and the public that people have a fondness for them and also see them as down-to-earth and relatable, despite being mega rich and famous for almost 40 years. Although the Beckhams are generally beloved, they have had their share of public scandals over the last 40 years. They've had everything from alleged affairs to Scientology spending hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to recruit them multiple times, leaks emails that exposed when David Beckham blew up about the royal family, there's an alleged feud with Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, and there's even multiple tax scandals. They really have had a colorful history in the public eye, and their latest scandal is their feud with their oldest son Brooklyn Beckham and his wife Nicole, whose father is a controversial billionaire. And although the feud has been building for over 2 years, in the last few months it's been bubbling to the surface as Brooklyn and Nicola have used Nicola's father's money to not only allegedly hire Harry and Meghan's lawyer, an interesting move as David and Victoria had a pretty well-documented fallout with Harry and Meghan, but Brooklyn and Nicola have also hired Harvey Weinstein's former PR master. Brooklyn and Nicola hired Weinstein's former publicist, Matthew Heldzink, who is known in Hollywood as an attack dog, the go-to crisis management specialist, and a PR guru. They hired him in June of this year, and he certainly has been hard at work over the last 3.5 months. If you follow any sort of celebrity content, you may have noticed over the summer the wall-to-wall coverage of Brooklyn and Nicola, despite the fact that neither of them really warrants really any coverage, never mind this insane level of coverage. They've been on magazine covers, had countless photo shoots, endless interviews and articles, and it's all really about nothing because it's not like they have a movie to promote, a photography book that's going to come out, a TV show. There's just really nothing. There also has been an avalanche of negative coverage about David and Victoria, and even though Brooklyn and Nicola only got married 3 years ago, they also have had a very publicized vow renewal over the summer. The vow renewal seemed to be sending a strong message through the media about Brooklyn's estrangement from his family, as the vow renewal was officiated by Nicola's billionaire father. Nicola's family were all there, and it was all over social media and pictures and all in all types of media coverage, but none of Brooklyn's family were even invited. Not his parents, his brothers, his sister, grandparents, aunts, no one. There is so much to dive into with this feud because I've had some very interesting details told to me about specifically what Brooklyn and Nicola are doing PR-wise and with the press. And this story is just fascinating to look at into how a lot of this PR stuff works behind the scenes. But I've also had some very interesting stories about the Beckhams behind the scenes and what some people who worked for them said they were really like behind the scenes, and allegedly what David Beckham spilled behind closed doors to someone in a very intimate setting. So before we get into the family feud, I want to lay out a little bit of the history about David and Victoria Beckham, and more so their individual rises to fame in the 90s, as because they've been famous for so long, a lot of their early days gets glossed over, and I think it's very important context for the type of people they are today and how they conduct themselves with the media now, and really how they always have. David and Victoria both became megastars individually in the mid-90s, but when they became a couple, they ascended to global superstardom. They were both two hugely famous individuals, but when they got together, they not only were one of the first mega celebrity couples, but they also became one of the first celebrity couple brands whose relationship was a selling point of their brand. David, from the very start of his career, did things very differently from footballers before him. He was at the forefront of celebrity brand deals. He became the footballer that kids wanted to be like off the pitch and on the pitch. He was one of the first footballers to have his post-football career eclipse his time as a player, which I can't really think of anyone else that did that before him. And Victoria was not only part of one of the first megastar girl groups, but also one of the first in the music industry to have a second huge career in the fashion industry. And while there were celebrity couples before the Beckhams and celebrity brands, David and Victoria really were one of the first celebrity couples and individuals who brought being a brand to a whole new level. And what's super unique about them is that they both became more famous after they retired from their original careers as a pop star and a footballer, which is wild when you think about it, because it isn't like they were just, and I don't mean like, oh, just a famous footballer and just a famous singer. Like, David Beckham is one of the most famous footballers of all time. His career in the 90s and 2000s, it was so huge. And as I said, Victoria was a member of one of the most successful music groups of all time. They are the most successful girl group of all time and have sold over 100 million records. Of course, the group being the Spice Girls. 100 million records is an insane number for the 90s, but thinking about that today, I mean, people today, 20 million is an insane number. So thinking about how successful the Spice Girls were, and in such a short time too, like they basically had their 2 albums come out just over a year in between each other. I will keep it brief with the history of the Spice Girls because my audience is like 75-80% women, and the vast majority of those women are between 30 and 45. So I'm guessing everyone is pretty up to date on their Spice Girls lore. The Spice Girls was formed in 1994 by a father and son duo, Bob and Chris Herbert, who wanted to make a girl group to compete against the slew of boy bands that were dominating pop at this time. They placed an ad in the newspapers in February 1994, and there was almost 3 other members of the Spice Girls at one point, different from obviously the 5 members that were the Spice Girls. At one point, there was a member called Michelle Stevenson, who was the original member before Emma Bunton came, and there was another Mel C at one point that the Mel C that we all know actually replaced her. But after some false starts and a couple of member swaps, they ended up with the final selection in 1994 of Mel B, Victoria Adams, Jerry Halliwell, Mel C, and Emma Bunton. And with those five, the band Touch was born. Throughout 94, the five girls lived in a 3-bedroom house in London and worked on their music together. But by the end of 94, the band still didn't have an official contract with Bob and Chris and their management group, Heart Management. In December of 94, the group persuaded the Herberts to let them do a showcase for producers and writers in the industry. And they performed at Nobis Studios, where they received a massive reaction. When the Herberts saw how positively people were reacting to the group, they then decided that they were highly motivated to produce a contract and get all five of the band to sign it. But upon seeing this contract and showing it to Victoria's father for some legal advice, all of the members refused to sign it. After they refused to sign the contract, they began looking for other representation, and by this stage, they had actually changed their name from Touch to Spice, as when they were working on their music throughout 94, there was a couple of songwriters that they'd worked with who insisted that they learn to write their own songs. And one of the first songs that they wrote, the five of them together, was called Sugar and Spice, and that prompted them to change the name to Spice. They ended up changing the name to the Spice Girls, as there was a rapper with the name Spice at the time, and people in the industry had started referring to them as those Spice Girls, so they picked that name. It did end up fitting them very well, because the original ad that they all saw for the audition for the group talked about 5 distinctly different girls. So when they started being known as the Spice Girls, they would say they each brought a different spice to the group. And I also like how they took the girls label and kind of turned it around, because the mid-90s obviously was a very different place for women, especially women in the music industry. And then they had the whole girl power thing, which a lot of people, including little 90s me, loved. The nicknames that they would eventually all go by, Jerry, Sporty, Posh, Scary, and Baby, were actually chosen by a kid for a magazine competition. And this sort of thing, like 5 random girls answering an ad in a paper, picking their name from their own writing, and then a kid picking their nicknames. I mean, you'd never see this today. Everything is so produced with marketing people and PR and focus tested. And I think that is an element of why the Spice Girls were so insanely popular, because they really came across as real and genuine and incredibly authentic. I mean, if you see them in interviews, even when they were already famous and doing a world tour, they had this realness about them that I just don't think would ever happen today, because everything is so manufactured and polished, and a lot of that is with social media and people recording everything and famous people being aware that people are recording at all times. I just don't think that you ever would really see anything like them again. By March 95, they left Heart Management, and they actually allegedly stole their own master's recordings so that they could stay in control of their work, as by this stage, they'd written a number of their future hits, including Wannabe and To Become One. They started putting out demo tapes, which caught the attention of Simon Fuller, who signed them in May 1995, and after a bidding war in July 95, they signed a 5-album deal with Virgin Records. On July 8th, 1996, they finally released their first debut single, Wannabe, in the UK, and from that point on, it was just pretty much world domination for the Spice Girls. Wannabe spent 7 weeks at #1 in the UK, and this was when it was a huge deal who was number one. And of course, we didn't have streaming. You had to physically go and buy the tape or the CD or record it off the radio. I'm sure everyone who's my age, a few years younger and a few years older, or everybody who's older, can remember going into places like Woolworths and Sam Goody and buying a new single on a Saturday. Wannabe hit number one in 37 countries, including 4 weeks at number one in the US, which was huge for a British band, especially a UK girl group. Wannabe became not only the best-selling debut single by an all-female group, but also the best-selling single by an all-female group of all time. It was just after Wannabe was released that the article in Top of the Pops that I mentioned where they got their nicknames came out, and so pretty much after Wannabe is when they were starting to be known by their nicknames. And from pretty much the end of 96 onward, they started to really be known by those nicknames more than their actual real names. In October 96, they released Say You'll Be There, and it also became number one. In November 96, they released their first album, Spice, which ended up selling 3 million copies just in the UK alone, becoming the best-selling album of all time by a female group. It also was the fastest-selling album since the Beatles. It went platinum 10 times and spent 15 weeks at number one. And then just to cap the year off at an absolute peak, the next month in December 96, they closed out the year with Two Become One becoming the Christmas number one. Again, something that was a huge deal in the 90s and early 2000s. That Christmas in 96, the Spice Girls also switched on the Christmas lights in Oxford Street, London, to a crowd of 500,000 people. They signed multi-million-dollar sponsorship deals at the end of the year with Walker's Crisps, Cadbury Chocolate, Polaroid, Pepsi, and Impulse deodorant, and I had all of those Spice Girls products. In January 97, they dominated the US when Wannabe was released, and it reached number one for 4 weeks, as I mentioned. And the following month, in February 97, they released their album Spice in the US. It also hit number one and sold over 7.4 million copies, becoming the best-selling album of 1997. The same month is when they opened the Brit Awards with Who Do You Think You Are? And that's when Jerry wore her iconic Union Jack dress. And from that point on, it was even bigger Spice Mania, because this was them absolutely taking over the US, something that was nearly impossible for British bands to do, especially at that time. In the summer of 97, they filmed their absolute masterpiece, the movie Spice World, and by the end of the year, they started releasing singles from their second album, also called Spice World. And in November, they released the Spice World album. Again, records broken, awards won, 14 million copies sold. Absolute insanity, especially wild considering they only released their first album Spice in 96, and just over a year and a bit later they're releasing their second album. Never would happen today. The following year in 1998, they started their world tour, but we'll put a tiny pause here to quickly catch up on where David Beckham is history-wise prior to Victoria, because they actually met in 97. So while this is going on with the Spice Girls, this is when they met, when they were at their absolute just top of their rise. And they actually ended up, David and Victoria, meeting because Mel C took Victoria to a football game. And David had already had a crush on Victoria because, as I've said, the Spice Girls were everywhere. And he and a teammate, Gary Neville, were actually watching TV when the Spice Girls came on. And David said to Gary, I'm going to marry that one, and pointed to Victoria. So after David had played this game that Mel C and Victoria were at, he was asked if he wanted to meet some of the Spice Girls who were attending the game, and he quickly asked which ones were there and was excited to hear that one of the ones that was there was Victoria. Mel C really wasn't impressed because she's from Liverpool, she's a Scouser, and she supports Liverpool football team, and Liverpool and Manchester United, who David Beckham played for, have a huge rivalry. I cannot really explain it in any way outside of the UK. Like, usually I can come up with a American equivalent like straight away, but I don't know whether it's because the UK is smaller and there's not as many teams or what, but there just isn't the same sort of rivalry. This is just on a totally other level. And David Beckham actually grew up as a Manchester United fan. There's a documentary called Beckham on Netflix where it's all about David's childhood and him becoming a player and all his football career and everything like that. It's really good. It's actually produced and directed by Fisher Stevens, who is Hugo in Succession. So that is a totally random fact, but when David Beckham was growing up, his dad was like die-hard Manchester United fan, and that's very much what my dad is. My dad is die-hard Manchester United, and even though I'm not someone who would go and like turn on a football game, I'm really not like into it. But when I was growing up, my dad took me to all the games. I played football. My brother's 15 years younger than me, so I was his son before he had a son. And it just is one of those things that even today, like my nephews, they are Liverpool fans because they live in Liverpool. My brother-in-law is a Liverpool fan. The only thing my dad doesn't like about him. And it kills me to go and buy them Liverpool shirts. And I'm not even a football person. So like that is how deep this kind of rivalry is between these two teams. When David and Victoria met in 1997, David Beckham was already a pretty big star for Manchester United, and Manchester United is a really big team too. David Beckham actually signed to Man United, their youth team, in 1991. They signed these kids like really young, like 13, 14, and he started playing professionally in 1993 when he was only 17. He was extremely talented as a kid, but became especially known for how he could bend balls in ways that other players couldn't. His dad actually became concerned when he was younger because he was quite small and started giving him a pint of Guinness and a raw egg. David made his Premier League debut for United in 1995 at 19 years old, and the following season in 96-97, he became a household name when he scored an insane goal against Wimbledon. This, of course, was way before social media, but everyone was talking about this goal. It was on all of the match of the days. It was even on the news because he literally scored from his own half. Just before the halfway line, he absolutely boots the ball and it goes straight into the goal. And this was voted as like one of the top sporting moments countless times. And so from that point, when he was 19, he was just known as a huge star. And when this was happening, Manchester United really was entering a golden era too, where they just started winning everything. Although David was a big star when he met Victoria, the first year that they were together, he just went to a complete another level, because the 97-98 season for Manchester United, they did pretty much the impossible. They ended up winning the treble, which is the Premier League, the FA Cup, and the Champions League. And I cannot overstate how huge this was. And it wasn't done again until like 2 or 3 years ago when Manchester City won the treble in the 2022-2023 season. So in 1998, David Beckham had done something that is practically unheard of. He also was playing on the England team by this stage, and he not only was on the England squad, but he was on the England squad for the 1998 World Cup. Also, by 1998, David and Victoria had gotten engaged, even though they hadn't really been together that long. And as I said, he was an enormous football star. He'd come off this insane season, and Victoria is in the biggest girl group in the world. The press attention around them was absolutely insane. And they also were these new kinds of celebrities where their relationship was also part of their brand and their appeal, which, especially when it came to David Beckham, this wasn't really done by footballers prior to him. It was very much, and this was something that Manchester United didn't actually like, that Victoria had her own career and had her own fame too, because with a lot of the footballers, they want them to have a wife that's just dedicated to being a footballer's wife. The Manchester United manager, Sir Alex Ferguson, and honestly a lot of football club managers want their football players to have a wife and a family and kind of go that home life route rather than the partying route. And that's because they believe that that helps them stay focused more on the football than everything else that comes with being a footballer and the fame and the money. And again, this is the 90s, so Alex Ferguson and a lot of people at Manchester United weren't fans of Victoria Beckham. And in the Beckham documentary on Netflix, they interview everyone pretty much for this documentary. A lot of David Beckham's fellow players on the Man United team at the time, Alex Ferguson, and just tons of other people associated with the club. And they all talk about David driving 4 hours to see Victoria for 40 minutes because both their schedules, as I was just saying, is so hectic at this time. David did seem to be 100% smitten with Victoria, and he also was someone not into the whole nightclub scene. In the documentary, they set up a lot of the comments and clips from around this time in the late 90s about the fellow players and his friends and his family saying how they were concerned that his, not, I don't want to say infatuation in a bad way, but obviously they were young, they were in love, and he was very focused on Victoria. And so a lot of his family and friends were worried, along with obviously Manchester United that's paying him millions of dollars, that he would become distracted and that he wouldn't be spending the time he should and not as focused on his career at Manchester United. They also, a lot of his fellow players talked about how they would be, going, and a lot of the time the football players stay in a hotel the night before. And his friend Gary Neville was saying, at 3 a.m., he'd be in the bathroom on the phone to Victoria. And in the documentary, they kind of set all this up as if to be like, oh, then his career took this huge nosedive. But really, and they do say this in the documentary too, that it didn't affect his career at all. And if anything, he went on to even more success, because when he and Victoria started going out, that was not too long before he was selected for the England squad. And in case you don't know too much about football or soccer, there's only 22 players selected for the England team, and there's only 11 of them that are starters. And Beckham was not only on the team a starter, but he was one of the stars of the entire England squad for years and years. He did actually even go on to captain England, and he ended up being the captain for England 59 times out of his 115 appearances. And that's the fourth highest amount of captaincies for any player in England's history. And his 115 appearances is the second most that anyone in history has played for England. And there is a bit more about his play for England that I will just touch on very briefly later. During this World Cup in 1998 in France, he was actually benched for a few games, but that was more to do with the English manager at the time, Glenn Hoddle, and his personal issues with Beckham. And some of those had to do with Victoria and him wanting to be able to spend time with her and speak to her, because all of the other players, they were having the World Cup in France. All of them had their wives and their family and their support systems with them, and they're there for months. And David obviously didn't have Victoria there because she's on tour in the US at this stage. David Beckham does describe the 1998 World Cup as changing his life, but not in a good way, as he went through the 90s version of cancellation after this World Cup. He was actually given a red card in one of the semi-finals for clipping another player being sent off at this crucial match. And whenever a player is sent off for a red card, it means that the team plays one player down. So instead of having 11 players on the pitch, they only have 10. And as I explained before, people in the UK are absolutely fucking nuts about football. And a lot of them are very, very sure every year that England is going to win the World Cup or the Euros. And so David being taken out and being one of the stars, a lot of people thought that David Beckham literally cost them the World Cup. And so this turned into a massive, massive deal. And Beckham was really, really hated for a long time after the World Cup. And a lot of people actually forget that, yes, Beckham was sent off, and who knows what would have happened between him being sent off and the end of the game. But the end of the game, it was a tie. So they actually ended up losing with penalties. And that is just the most typical England thing in the world. Normally, they will always be taken out of big tournaments on penalties. It's literally one team shoots 5 penalties, the other team shoots 5 penalties. And, if at the end of the 5 penalties, say both of them have 4, they then kind of go to sudden death, where it's just like, okay, we're going to shoot until someone's one up and then that's it. But the people at the time really saw David Beckham being taken out as him costing England the World Cup. And the manager of England also came out and blamed Beckham, which is really shitty, like no matter if it was true. But he basically was kind of using David Beckham as a scapegoat, and David Beckham got absolutely destroyed. I mean, this isn't just the way, people would get canceled now online with like social media and stuff. Like people literally at other football games would be screaming, booing him. When he was out, there'd be people like throwing shit. Like there was death threats. There was awful, awful things said and done to him, and also said about like Victoria.
Every football fan sang this song. Posh Spice takes it up the arse. Excuse my language, not very ladylike, but 75,000 people singing that.
Also, the night before this game, Victoria actually told David that she was pregnant with their son Brooklyn. So after England were knocked out of the World Cup, David Beckham then went and joined the Spice Girls for a bit of their tour. As I said, they were in the US by this stage. And this was also when the Spice Girls had gone through a huge thing as well, because Jerry had actually left the group halfway, well, not even halfway through the tour, and most of the US dates, and then all of the tour afterwards, Jerry wasn't there and she wasn't a part of the band anymore. I actually went to the opening night of their world tour. It was the first concert I went to ever. I think I was 10, and I went in Dublin, so I did get to see them when Jerry was still there. And I actually, like, the shirt is from their reunion tour in 2007, 2008. And whenever this tour came out, you had to do this, like, enter the kind of like this lottery for tickets. And I ended up up getting tickets to LA and London. I went to the LA concert with my sisters, and then I went to the London one with my high school friends, and we all came over from the Isle of Man and went to the London one. And then in 2019, when they did their latest reunion tour, Victoria actually wasn't at that one, but in 2019, my dad got me tickets for my birthday to go and see the Spice Girls with all my high school friends. So we went to the Dublin show in 2019 and had like an amazing time. So I have really, really fond memories of seeing the Spice Girls, especially with a lot of my friends who I still have a lot of friends from high school or from boarding school from when I was 11. And it's just lots of good memories with the Spice Girls. So although David and Victoria were experiencing enormous heights at this point in their careers, they were also going through enormous difficulties, especially David with this amount of backlash that he was going through. David and Victoria did lean on each other a lot in this time, and in March 1999, Victoria gave birth to their first son, Brooklyn Beckham, and a lot of people falsely claim that he was named Brooklyn because that's where he was conceived, but that actually isn't true. It was kind of like a secondary thing that Victoria was actually in Brooklyn in New York whenever she told David that she was pregnant, but obviously he was at the World Cup. Victoria actually originally liked the name Brooke for a girl, and then she decided on Brooklyn for a boy. And as I said, it was just kind of that's kind of cool too, because I was in Brooklyn when I told him I was pregnant. And then David said that he thought it was kind of like a cool, like Brooklyn Beckham name because he thought his son might end up being a footballer like him. David and Victoria also started getting lots of kidnapping threats around the birth, and they were absolutely hounded by the paparazzi for pictures of the baby because, of course, the paparazzi knew how much money these pictures would fetch. That summer in 1999, Posh and Becks also got married just outside Dublin, and a British magazine ended up paying £1 million, which at that time was close to $2 million for exclusive pictures of the wedding. And a lot of the magazine that ended up doing these exclusive pictures of the wedding, OK and Hello were usually the two that would do it in the UK. They would end up doing baby photo shoots and release like the first pictures of the kids that way too. There also are a lot of horrible clips of their kids scared in cars when the paparazzi's all around and like chasing them. There's a really horrible one in the documentary on Netflix where Brooklyn, I mean, he must be like 3, maybe a little bit younger, and he's like crying and they're telling him, don't worry, they can't get in the car, it's okay.
Right, Buster, they can't get in the car. Right, they can't get in the car.
The Beckhams have talked over the years about how much they worry about like that affecting their kids because not only the paparazzi, but as I said, there's been lots of threats against them. They do have paparazzi people that used to hound the Beckhams in the Netflix documentary, and they do get confronted by Fisher Stevens saying like, did you never feel bad about doing this to literal children? And the paparazzis, of course, are like, oh, well, it was a different time, we wouldn't do that today, but it just infuriates me, especially with people's kids. I mean, it's one thing when it's the adults and, a lot of celebrities, as I talk about a lot on the channel, more often than not, unless it's like a huge star like Britney Spears, or honestly, the Beckhams probably fall into this, a lot of celebrities, they're orchestrating their paparazzi shots, especially today. They all have relationships with photographers, and especially if you see, Chance Crawford is like absolutely notorious for it, that he'll be walking down the street and have Buffalo Wild Wings, or, a lot of celebrities, especially if you see some sort of product and it just happens that the label is turned right to face the camera. A lot of that stuff isn't only paparazzi and the celebrity like making a deal to, okay, come here and take these shots of me, but there's also brands involved in the whole thing too. And they'll actually be being paid to go and take these pictures with paparazzi. Again, today, especially, it's just so prevalent, especially people like Bradley Cooper, who is allegedly in a lot of orchestrated relationships. If he's on vacation in a random town in Utah, paparazzi aren't finding him there. Like, they are putting this all together, and that is just how a lot of this stuff works now. However, in the 90s it was different because you did have the Beckhams at this really beginning stages of their massive fame, but also there were no rules or laws, or even people's opinion was very different about paparazzi and celebrities being hounded and kids being hounded. Today, people have a lot more empathy, especially towards celebrities' kids. And in the UK, there are also, thankfully, like laws and things now with celebrities' kids and kids in general that they do have to, one, like most of the time, they are supposed to not be taking pictures of kids, but they can't sell them to magazines and newspapers and put them on social media in the same way. And they can't profit from it. So they've no interest in it. And you'll see, especially like a lot of British outlets, the kids' faces will be blurred and things like that. Although at the same time, what they do to kind of get around this is they will go and take the pictures of the kids. And yes, they will sell, the celebrity picture for the actual celebrity to the British outlets, and then they'll go and sell them to the US outlets for like the kid, and then they won't blur the face because you don't have to in the US. So as I said, in March 1999, Brooklyn Beckham is born, and that summer they get married. And in December 1999, the Spice Girls do a small tour after their massive world tour, and they have had their 2 albums out within like 18 months. They had a movie, and they've had a bazillion other things going on. And they decided in December 1999 that they were going to slow things down, as not only did Jerry depart, as I said, midway through the tour in 98, but Victoria and Mel B had both had babies in 1999. The December 99 tour was in the UK only, and during this tour, they played songs from their upcoming 3rd album. The Spice Girls were still massively successful after Jerry left, but it wasn't quite to the same level. Well, it really wasn't to the same level. They did end up receiving a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Brit Awards the following year in 2000. And in November of 2000, they did, sans Jerry, release their 3rd and final album titled Forever. Forever was very different from their first 2 albums, and while it still was successful, it was just not anywhere close to their previous albums. In December 2000, the Spice Girls stopped all promotional for their album and began an indefinite hiatus to concentrate on their solo careers, but they did assure fans that they were not splitting up. And for the next 7 years, we lived in a Spice Girls-less world. In 2001, Victoria signed on with Virgin Records, who is who the Spice Girls had their record deal with, and released her self-titled album. In September 2002, Victoria and David ended up having their second son, Romeo. And also in 2002, Victoria signed a contract worth $1.5 million with Telstar Records and 19 Management to bring about her next album after that first one. Victoria did release a single from this next album, but the album was actually never released officially. It did end up leaking online several years ago, but the album was never released because Telstar Records ended up going bankrupt. Victoria was frustrated by the wasted studio time, but this ended up being one of those things that seems awful when it happens, but it really was leading her to something much better, because her solo career was never going to be like this huge, massive thing, but she did go on to have a massive fashion career that she wanted to focus on after the palaver with Telstar Records. During the first half of the 2000s, Victoria did a lot of modeling and represented a lot of high-end brands, and in 2004, she ended up releasing high-end jeans that were incredibly successful, and from that point on, she became very involved in the fashion world, doing things like styling her friend Katie Holmes, and she was the face of even more brands through the 2000s, eventually launching her own denim line, DVB Style, and then she ended up opening her own official website to promote all of her fashion work, dvbstyle.com. During the first half of the 2000s, while Victoria was moving into the fashion world, David and Victoria had also moved to Spain in 2003 after David signed a 4-year contract to play for Real Madrid. There was a bit of a fallout with David and the manager at Manchester United, Alex Ferguson, over David speaking to the Real Madrid manager, and he kind of was iced out of Manchester United. Spain wasn't really a good fit for them, and Victoria found it very difficult moving the young kids, the language barrier, and with the move being very last minute too. Obviously, it's a lot to move kids to with things like schools, so she just never really settled. In February 2005, they ended up having their third son, Cruz, and 2 years later, in 2007, they decided that Spain wasn't for them, and they ended up having a move to Los Angeles when David signed a contract with the LA Galaxy. Now, one thing I didn't go over during the mid and early 2000s is when the Beckhams had one of their biggest scandals ever, and that was the Rebecca Loos cheating scandal. Just after David had moved to Spain, before Victoria had joined him, there was a lot that came out about David Beckham and his former personal assistant, Rebecca Loos. Rebecca claimed that she had a 4-month affair with David Beckham, and in my opinion, it's extremely rare that these famous people don't cheat and don't have, some of them have open relationships or have other stuff going on. And the rule usually is do what you want, but don't make me look stupid. And the whole thing with Rebecca Loos blew up into a huge thing that was extremely embarrassing for Victoria. There have been many more allegations about David Beckham and other women over the years. There was a multi-year long allegation about him and the singer Katherine Jenkins, and there have been rumors for years that the Beckhams have a somewhat open relationship. All of that's obviously alleged. I do have a friend that has a friend, so I'm hearing this through someone else. This isn't someone I've spoken to directly, but this friend claims that their friend did hook up with David Beckham, and this certainly isn't the only thing that I've heard over the years. I'm sure lots of people have heard things through the grapevines, and my friend's friend said that when they had hooked up afterwards, Beckham kind of spoke about how he was really lonely and how his family were all really busy and his kids were starting to have their own lives and things, and he just wanted to be around them. But then again, it's like, oh, you're telling this to someone who you're sleeping with allegedly that's not your wife. There are lots of stories over the years, and I'm sure so many other people have heard them, especially when he would go on loan to other clubs and things. There were always stories that would come out, and even things like in blinds and stuff, which obviously you can't believe all blinds, but it's certainly not a one-off story with Rebecca Loos, and it is something that has been alleged about him over the years. But again, we don't know any of that for a fact. I will also say that although I have heard about alleged hookups and things, everything else that I've heard about David and Victoria behind the scenes, especially when it comes to with their kids, is really positive. They seem to generally be actually super involved with their kids, which isn't usually the case with a lot of celebrities, especially celebrities at their level of fame. And I've heard similar things from people that have worked with them or dealt with them on like a day-to-day basis thing. Then also people that are servers and valets, they do seem to have a good reputation with people behind the scenes, which again is not always the case with a lot of celebrities and famous people. And there are a lot of famous people who they might only be famous because of who their parents are, and they tend to be the furthest thing from kind behind the scenes. And one of those people allegedly is Nicola Peltz, who is married to David and Victoria's oldest son, Brooklyn. So we will now get into the Beckham feud as where we're up to in their history, like 2007 when they moved to the US and the Spice Girls had their first reunion tour. I think most people are familiar with this era, but the very quick kind of few lines is they moved to the US and they were welcomed with open arms. So many people were really excited about them moving. Tom Cruise and Will Smith even threw them a welcome to America party. As I said, in 2007 and early 2008, the Spice Girls did their first reunion tour. And at this time, David was playing for the Galaxy, but he did go on loan to AC Milan. He did have some issues with the Galaxy when he first moved there because it was just like a very different situation than football in the UK, because soccer in the US just isn't as popular. It isn't given the same sort of accolades. And there was some people that were playing on the Galaxy who were earning what David Beckham would in a week in an entire year, because he was given this crazy $250 million contract. And there was some people on the Galaxy who were maybe making 30K from the Galaxy a year. And even I remember whenever he first signed to the Galaxy, I was like, oh, this is so great. They're coming to the US. And they actually had the same type of visa that I had at the time before I got a green card and an O1 visa. And David Beckham, whenever I saw I was going to the Galaxy, I went to buy a shirt and they had these like, oh, they were so ugly. They were like puke yellow, horrible color with like green stripes. And I remember they signed him and like 2 months later they like revamped the whole kit and like they put so much money into it. And the main player at the Galaxy, Donovan, he actually, I think he was the captain of the US team at one point. I have one of his US jerseys. And he and Beckham like clashed a lot because the owner or the manager of the Galaxy was kind of saying, you know, David, you're coming in here making all this crazy money and you don't seem to be, you know, all in, because he's like asking to go out on loan again to AC Milan. And the manager was explaining like, this is Donovan's Manchester United, you know, and when he saw it that way, they had a few words in the media against each other, Beckham and Donovan, but they did eventually put their issues aside and they did go on to actually win the Cup together, and Donovan appears in the Netflix documentary too. If you want to know a lot more about like the ins and outs, especially of David's football career, I do recommend watching the Netflix documentary because there's a lot more to it, but it's very like football heavy and I just don't think my audience is interested in that. Victoria, outside of 2007, the 2008 Spice Girls tour, she pretty much has focused on her fashion career from then. And the Spice Girls did reunite again in 2012 for the opening ceremony of the Olympics in London. But outside of that, as I said, she didn't do the 2019 tour and she's just been very focused on her brand and everything like that. Of course, through the rest of the 2010s, their kids are growing up and they did have one more kid, a daughter, Harper, 7, in 2011. In 2013, David actually retired from football, and at this stage, they did move back to London. And really, over the rest of the 2010s, they're just still very successful, still bringing out a lot of new things. They're focusing on their brand. They start some more companies. And around 2015, there started to be a lot of rumors about trouble in their marriage, but they did end up renewing their vows in 2017. And the year after that, there were divorce rumors. So there's always kind of this talk in the media about their relationship. But honestly, I think at this stage, so much of their relationship is tied into their business and them as celebrities that even if they didn't want to be married anymore, which I'm not saying that's the case, they probably would still stay married just because of the brand and how they're known as celebrities. So their kids have all grown up by the late 2010s for the most part, and their oldest son, Brooklyn, started trying his hand at a few different careers. All of David's sons did try in their teens, especially to play football, and they were all signed at one point to youth teams, but they never progressed further than that. Their second son, Romeo, did get a little bit further than the others, but by their mid-teens, it seemed they kind of knew like none of them were going to be professional footballers. In summer 2017, Brooklyn Beckham released a photography book that was pretty much destroyed online. A picture he took of an elephant that he put in the book especially went viral and kind of represented how frustrated people were with Nepo babies who don't really know what they're doing, don't do any work, don't try really, and just get handed a lot of opportunities that are taken away from regular people who really had done the work and gotten good. I actually am thinking about doing a video about Nepo babies, so let me know if that's something that you're interested in. Brooklyn then moved on to being a chef, and he was given opportunities, many opportunities that people would work their entire lives for and still not get. He started being given a lot of segments on TV shows, and people, again, were really frustrated by the fact that he hadn't done the work, he hadn't really tried, and he'd just been kind of given these things after maybe a few days of being like, I'm going to be a chef. Hi guys, Editing Ash here. I'm hoping this is the last Editing Ash section. There is another one that I've already filmed, but it's the 21st of September, Sunday, so I'm hoping that you see this tonight or tomorrow. But I have to add this context in because I'm never, ever going to get over this, ever. I have been talking, and I do talk throughout the video, about Brooklyn Beckham being given a lot of like these cooking segments on shows, and a lot of, well, all of the time, he isn't really even like making the stuff in the cooking segments, and they are very simple stuff. Like most of the time it's like a sandwich, like a very popular breakfast sandwich in the UK, and literally like a sandwich like in bread or in a bap, which is like a bun kind of. They do sausage, bacon, and egg baps that we call it, in as like a sandwich in the morning, and they sell them like gas stations, or you know, like it's a really popular thing to make too at home. And it's just British sausages, British bacon, which are two very, they're, it's very different from American sausages and bacon, and an egg, like usually a fried egg. Miss Gloria could whip one up, and on these segments, he's having someone else make the bacon, someone else make the sausage, and then he's frying the egg and putting the sandwich together. So that's what he's doing on the segments on other people's shows. There is a show that he was given on Facebook and Instagram, so not even a YouTube show. And you know, I know I'm biased, but YouTube is like the top of video social media, and it is the most monetizable too. So he has a show just on Facebook and Instagram called Cooking with Brooklyn. This show per episode has a budget of $100,000, and there is 62 fucking people working on this show, making sandwiches that other people are making. That's what those 62 people are doing. They're making the sausages and the bacon and the egg, and then he's putting it together in a sandwich. $100,000. I will never get over this. As someone who, the first year of my channels, I literally shot and edited my videos on an iPhone because I didn't even have a laptop. But like, $100,000, is there a bigger waste of money on this earth? No. So back to past me, who is living in a better world because she didn't know this information. So people just were getting more and more frustrated. And there were a lot of like videos and things that went viral about him. And I do think a lot of the time these Nepo babies would save themselves a lot of trouble if they would just acknowledge their privilege. Like that's all really people want. There was a super viral video of him where he's driving like I think it was like a Lamborghini or something like that. I can't remember off the top of my head. And it's like a YouTuber or TikToker that goes up to people driving really expensive cars and says, you know, what do you do? And he says, oh, I'm a chef. And, you know, I think he's kind of in a rock and a hard place because obviously, you know, like a 20-year-old driving a Lamborghini isn't getting that from being a chef. But if he literally just would have made a joke out of it or something and said, I'm a chef, but, you know, my dad's David Beckham or my wife's a billionaire, something like that, like, I think he would have scored a lot of points with people. But instead, he just does the complete opposite of what people want. And that is try and say, I'm the successful chef that bought this Lamborghini. Obviously, he didn't say exactly that, but that's what he's kind of implying. So when it comes to Brooklyn and his wife, Nicola Peltz, they really are fighting an uphill battle because, as I said, Nicola is the daughter of a billionaire and Brooklyn is a Nepo baby who has done a lot of things that have rubbed people the wrong way. And on the other side of the feud is David and Victoria Beckham, who both come from very normal backgrounds. Obviously, Victoria more privileged than David, but they both did not have their careers handed to them. And yes, although Victoria's family were like middle class, she didn't have her career handed to her. They both worked very hard for their careers and are both generally very liked by especially the general public. I mean, a Manchester United England player and a Spice Girl, people have a lot of positive will towards them, but in general, they just are a couple that a lot of people do like. One of my sisters who moved to England a few years ago, she was a fan of the Spice Girls when she was younger, but she loves David Beckham and he's like one of her top celebrities or her top celebrity with Louis Theroux. She's a woman of differing tastes. If I asked my sister about like the cheating stuff with David, she'd probably say, oh, like I vaguely remember something about Rebecca Lewis. And then she'd say, well, we don't know that for sure because most of what she sees is positive mainstream media stuff. She's someone who that's really how she gets like a lot of celebrity news is mainstream stuff. Like constantly I'll tell her all the stuff that I tell you guys. And she's always like, really? 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 Like she's just not someone who is into all of that stuff. And so someone like my sister, I think that's the way most general public people think of the Beckhams, like pretty positively. But when it comes to Brooklyn Beckham, I mean, the general public mostly are going to be like, oh, that's David and Victoria Beckham's kid. And then people who are into celebrity stuff, really the only things they're going to know about Brooklyn Beckham are usually not very positive things. They're going to be things like the photography book that got destroyed, the chef career, and the plethora of like other videos and media that lately has been shoving him and his wife down everyone's throats. And people are kind of like, why? Why are they getting all this publicity? Obviously, money, but people get frustrated by that because they're getting all this publicity and they're not doing anything. People in general are not fans of Nepo babies who don't put in the work to be good at acting or singing or playing a sport or whatever it is they're trying to have a career at. And they also are not fans of Nepo babies who don't acknowledge their privilege. There are plenty of Nepo babies who have successful careers and are liked by the general public. Maya Hawke and Jack Quaid spring to mind immediately. Both Maya and Jack acknowledge their privilege, but they've also put the work in as actors and they're good and they're on really great shows. I mean, those things are pretty basic. Be good at your job and acknowledge the privilege that's helped you get through the door, especially when you're being handed careers earning millions of dollars. Untalented, lazy Nepo babies who don't work hard and don't acknowledge their privilege are never going to be popular with the general public. But right now is probably the worst time in history to be one of these types of Nepo babies because so many people are going through a really, really hard time. And if you want to see how badly Nicola and Brooklyn are coming across to the general public, you only need to look at their social medias. As I said, they've always had a lot of negativity attached to them, but it seems the more that they are pushing themselves into the spotlight, the more backlash they receive. And on top of all the negativity towards them from their quote unquote careers, this attention seeking, and how poorly they come across to the public, they also now are getting backlash and tons of negative comments about their behavior towards Victoria and David. As I said, Brooklyn's wife Nicola is the daughter of a billionaire, and neither Nicola nor her dad have very positive reputations. Nicola's dad is actually the person who introduced Elon Musk to Donald Trump, and allegedly he tried to buy his way onto the Disney board because he was unhappy about all of the women and people of color that were being included in Disney and Marvel products. There have been a lot of people over the years that have spoken out about working with Nicola, especially people who worked with her on some of the few projects that she's done. They pretty much all have claimed that they had a very poor experience working with her and that she was allegedly terrible to deal with and incredibly rude. There also have long been rumors, which I don't know whether these are true because I've never been able to find black and white proof about this, but when she was a teenager, many people have alleged that she pushed one of her nannies down the stairs. So Brooklyn and Nicola don't have the best relationship with the public, and there's a lot of negative stuff that has come out from behind the scenes, especially about Nicola. So already Brooklyn and Nicola are facing a bit of an uphill battle because they're a Nepo baby and the daughter of a billionaire, and when it comes to this feud, the public has that, and then David and Victoria, who are generally liked. So it seems, or it allegedly seems, like Nicola and Brooklyn are trying to throw money at the situation to get some positive press, but also to try and dilute David and Victoria's private press. Now, apparently this feud between Brooklyn and Nicola and Brooklyn's family happened before Brooklyn and Nicola were married, and they got married in 2022. Allegedly, there were tensions between Nicola and Victoria, and over the wedding, there were a lot of blinds and articles that started to appear about a feud that was building. Anyone who's a regular viewer of the channel knows I always say one of the easiest ways to tell a lot of the time if celebrities or famous people are feuding is the whole follow, unfollow on Instagram. And I know that sounds dumb, but I would say 9 out of the 10 celebrity feuds, you can tell straight away by looking at what they're doing with their following on Instagram, because that's one of the only things that they can sometimes be in control of. A lot of the time, if say celebrities are working on something together, they'll be contractually obligated to post, and they'll be contractually obligated to follow all of these rules and do all of these things. But there's not going to be something in the marketing materials about you must follow this someone. And celebrities know that their fans are looking at these things, and it sounds silly, but that is how sometimes they get the message across, because they know people will be looking at this stuff, but it's not something that they're coming outright and saying, but the implication is there. And a lot of these celebrities not only know that their fans are watching and they're aware of this stuff, but the implication of unfollowing someone, especially in your family, that sends a message, and that is what has been going on between the Beckham siblings, because all of the brothers, Brooklyn, Cruz, and Romeo, all unfollowed each other. Interestingly, Brooklyn and Nicola still do follow David and Victoria, but maybe that's more to do with those being like their public accounts that they know they aren't going to be posting like a ton of personal stuff to. But Brooklyn and Nicola got a lot more blatant on social media in recent months than just unfollowing his brothers. As in May, David Beckham had a ton of parties for his 50th birthday, and Brooklyn and his wife were missing from all of them. They also didn't post any sort of birthday message. And again, that sounds silly, but all of this stuff matters to celebrities, and they also usually do, and they do for everyone else in their family and friends. And it was even more obvious because Nicola's brother's birthday is at the same time as David's, and Brooklyn Beckham posted this whole message on social media for his brother-in-law, but not for his dad. Brooklyn didn't acknowledge Victoria's birthday either, or his parents' 26th anniversary. The only time he's acknowledged anyone from the Beckham family over the last year and a half was when he posted a picture and wished his grandfather, Ted, David's dad, a happy birthday. And then on July 10th, he wished his youngest sibling, his sister Harper, a happy birthday. And coincidentally, July 10th, which is her birthday, is also when he unfollowed his brothers on Instagram. Although a lot of people do claim that Brooklyn has actually blocked his brothers, and that's why it doesn't look like they're following each other anymore. And that does seem to be true because it seems as though they unfollowed each other at exactly the same time, which why would they unfollow him at exactly the same time? And it also, when you block someone, it untags you on stuff too. Also, just a few weeks ago, some of Nicola's friends started actually speaking out on a lot of the articles and pictures of the vow renewals. One of Nicola's closest friends said, "I love seeing people who spend years in therapy over toxic family ties coming here and judging someone who actually had the guts to walk away. Everyone's been kissing the Beckham's ass forever, and Nicola was the first to stand up for her values, since couldn't care less about their fame or money. The moment they couldn't control everything, they lost it and started planting fake press to make her look bad in the public eye. I've known her for years. She's genuine, humble, and refuses to live in a fake." There was then a just random Instagram follower who made a comment about how maybe it was Brooklyn who excluded his parents, and if he really wanted them there, they would have been there, and Brooklyn ended up liking that comment. When there were all of these Instagram posts and comments and likes made, there were a couple of stories that came out in the media about it, and this was just a few weeks ago, and all of them quoted various sources that painted Brooklyn and Nicola in an amazing light and David and Victoria as narcissistic monsters. And in my opinion, I would be shocked to hear if those sources were anyone but Brooklyn and Nicola themselves. By the start of the summer, there were so many things that made it obvious that they were in this huge feud. But by August, just last month, they could not deny it anymore, as Brooklyn and Nicola ended up renewing their vows in August, and they only had a $3 million wedding in April 2022. And there's actually a whole lawsuit going on over Brooklyn and Nicola's wedding because the billionaires weren't happy. Hi guys, editing Ash here. So this probably doesn't need to be mentioned, but it is just so funny that I have to mention it. So Brooklyn and Nicola ended up getting married in April 2022, and they went through about 8 wedding planners, apparently. There is actually a lawsuit going on between, I believe, the 6 wedding planners and Nicola's dad, and it's for about $159,000 over a deposit that was paid to them. And the lawsuit, they actually of course, have like released all of the exhibits and things like that. And I was reading it just kind of because I always want to do as much research as possible for these. But because it was against her dad, I thought, oh, well, I'll read this while like I'm making the video. And if there's anything like interesting, I can add it in. And I read the entire thing. It is wild. The amount of emails and text messages is absolutely insane. I will leave the entire document linked in the sources. They definitely paint Nicola in Brooklyn in exactly the light that you would think. Just the most unhinged demands. And what's wild is that these wedding planners that the lawsuit's over, they were called in 6 weeks before the wedding. And there's like all this drama over the guest list. And they're like, the wedding planners are saying, oh, we got 4 lists. The first list we got from the Beckhams, and it's like this perfect list, everybody's names and all of their emails and phone numbers and everything about the people, the perfect list. And then they talk about these other lists that they got. One is from Nicola and Brooklyn that people's names are misspelled. They'll just be like Brad and like no one's last name. The list has no contact information. It just sounds like an absolute mess. And then a lot of the messages too, they talk about like, do not let the Beckhams know this is a shit show. And it's, oh my God, it is really funny to read. And especially because there's like all these group chats and you see the wedding planners asking Nicola, like, please, can we have, half an hour of your time to go through this guest list because it's a mess and we don't know these people, like we need you to go through it. And she just wants it all done over text, and they're like, well, there's like hundreds and hundreds of people, we can't just text it to you. So they make this app, and then she's like, I don't want an app, I just want it text to me. And it's such a mess. And then there's some messages where they've like taken people off the guest list, but her dad's put people on. And there's messages like, make sure that Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, is not invited, and all of this other stuff. And the only kind of inputs from Brooklyn, they'll ask him like, how old is this member of your family? And Nicola will interject and be like, I don't trust Brooklyn with this, he's just guessing, you need to ask like this assistant or that assistant. And then the only thing that Brooklyn really has input in, every so often they'll be having all these messages, like, I mean, hundreds of messages a day about this guest list. And then he'll just randomly interject about the Wendy's Frosties that he wants at the wedding. And they had like apparently these little Wendy's meals for people, and the wedding planner people sent over like, oh, there's going to be 6 meals, we'll name them these 6 things. I mean, the way like table names and stuff are at weddings. I remember one of my cousins, our family, everybody has a sweet tooth. So like each table was like a different type of chocolate. And these Wendy's meals, they name, like the wedding planners had named some of them like Bag It Like Beckham and stuff. And Nicola was like, no, take all the Beckham name off it. It's just so funny the way they're all talking about all this like guest stuff. And then he's just, what about the Frosties? I really need the Frosties there. It's just honestly. And he did also ask about the security having guns that shoot nets because he was worried about the drones that were probably going to be there. So he wanted to make sure that security had guns that shoot nets. If you have the time, it is worth the read just to see this sort of the way these people live that are having $3.8 million weddings, that it is just so far removed from like anything that I would be dealing with, that it just was really funny and interesting to read. And yeah, they do not come across well, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on the rest of the lawsuit. And maybe you guys wouldn't be interested on like an entire video on the lawsuit, but I do plan on posting on my new second channel, Coffee, Cults, and Cats, very soon. And this sort of thing would be a good video over there because I do plan on doing like more current eventy, shorter videos. Not like short, I mean short for me, like 20-30 minutes or something. So maybe going over this lawsuit when more stuff comes out would be really interesting. But honestly, this information is good enough to make a video on now. But anyway, back to Past Me. So they're in a whole lawsuit over that. But 3 years later, they renewed their vows. And there are also conspiracy theories about them doing this vow renewal so that whenever people are looking up anything about their wedding, because that's where a lot of the stories originated from when it comes to the feud, that they wanted to have, everything on Google and all of the SEO be tied to this vow renewal rather than their original wedding. But as I mentioned in the beginning, no one from the Beckham family was invited, and allegedly the Beckhams only found out about this vow renewal when it was posted online. And boy, did they post a lot about this vow renewal. Nicola's billionaire father officiated the renewal ceremony, and allegedly at the ceremony, friends of Nicola spoke about how proud they were of Brooklyn for walking away from a toxic family. At the renewal ceremony, Brooklyn also gave a speech, and in it he didn't mention his family at all, but praised Nicola's family and her father. Around this time too, Brooklyn started posting a lot on social media with phrases like, "I'll always choose Nicola, I'll always choose you." So people obviously read into this a lot, and it seemed again like a not so subtle kind of message. Obviously, I don't know any of these people, but it is kind of sad, as I have, as I said, always heard that the one things you can't fault the Beckhams for are their parenting, and I've yet to hear anything positive about the Peltzes. It does seem also, ever since Brooklyn and Nicola hired the lawyers and publicists of Weinstein, Johnny Depp, Mr. Beast, Meghan and Harry, and many others, that there have been a lot of stories in the media about them, and especially a lot of fluff that I just don't know why. Well, I do know why all these outlets are doing it. Money. They were even on the cover of Glamour as a power couple, which Brooklyn's 26, Nicola's 30. He has a hot sauce range, and she's the daughter of a billionaire who was miscast in Avatar: The Last Airbender, was in Transformers 4, and her last movie that she wrote, directed, and starred in made $648 at the box office. What makes them a power couple, aside from having a lot of money that they've inherited and having a famous last name? I did used to have like a tiny bit of sympathy for Brooklyn, because he did seem like a nice kid and a bit of a golden retriever man. And I do think that, again, like the smallest drop of sympathy, that having two incredibly successful parents, and anything you do is going to be scrutinized by millions and millions of people, but that sympathy is very small considering the privilege and wealth and fame and everything that is just handed to Brooklyn and all of these Nepo babies. He has all the money and privilege in the world. And the same with Nicola. They could literally go and study and become the best chef and become the best actress. They could go and work their way up, because obviously they have the privilege of like all of these connections, but also they can go and work for nothing or very little pay because they have so much money from their parents. But instead, they've just tried to bulldoze their way into success with their parents' money, privilege, and name. They're so ignorant that they don't even know how ignorant they are. They don't even know what they don't know. And that's evident by all of the things they put out. I mean, that movie that Nicola just put out, I'll leave a link to like a synopsis below. It is wild. But even things like the photography book, like you just have no understanding of what it actually takes for regular people to get something like that, because again, all of this is just handed to them. Even their social media followings, like they have careers that people would work for all of their lives and never get to like a fraction of their followings. I watched this video on Brooklyn's Instagram of him unboxing this collaboration his hot sauce company did with a fancy, I think it was a bourbon company. Some people would work all their lives to get something like that. And the product did look beautiful. It was a really fancy box, and from what I saw, looked gorgeous and all the products looked nice, but it was the worst promotion and unboxing I've ever seen in my fucking life. He starts recording and he's like holding up the box, and he hasn't even like reversed the image. So like you can't even really read it because it's backwards and it's so fast. And he doesn't even have like a table. He's like half holding it and like taking things out like, oh yeah, like just the most terrible job. Like you can't see anything. Like he said, oh, there's these cool glasses in here, but never takes them out of the box. It's just like not even half-assed, like it's just a mess.
I think these are glasses for when you make the drink, which is really cool. I think you get 2 of those, 2 glasses.
But he has 16 million followers, and even as terrible as that video was, it still had 13,000 likes, which, don't get me wrong, 16 million followers and only 13,000 likes, that's fucking horrendous. But it just sums everything up, because an influencer with a 100th of the following that Brooklyn Beckham has, they would know how to do an unboxing, and they would know how to post well on social media, because they would never even get to 100th of his following if they didn't, because no one else could post stuff like that and get 16 million followers. Again, all of this stuff is just literally handed to them, because it also doesn't matter. It doesn't actually matter if his social media is successful. It doesn't matter if his hot sauce is successful. He could actually even just do a Kylie Jenner and put out a tiny, tiny amount of these boxes or of his hot sauce, because it doesn't actually need to make money. It just needs to give the illusion of success. As I've been making this video, actually just yesterday, the trailer for Victoria's Netflix documentary came out. David had his documentary 2 years ago, so now it's Victoria's turn, because I believe both David's documentary Beckham and Victoria's, titled Victoria, they are both self-commissioned. There were a lot of articles yesterday about the trailer that seems to indicate there's a few little lines here and there acknowledging the fallout with Brooklyn and Nicola, but I'm pretty sure it will only be addressed with a very subtle little line or two, the same way David Beckham's Rebecca Lou's affair was addressed in his documentary. That's really to say it wasn't. Victoria just said, this period of time in Spain was the worst time of my life. It will be interesting to see what happens when this documentary comes out, and in the future, I'm sure Brooklyn and Nicola will keep pushing themselves into the spotlight more and more, but I don't think much of the public is waiting with bated breath to see what they'll do next. And really, by feuding with Brooklyn's parents, they've lost some of the only goodwill the public has towards them, since David and Victoria, as I said, are generally liked by the general public. I guess it's just a question of how long will the media allow them to pay their way into all of these things and to push their photo shoots and magazine covers and articles and interviews and all stuff like that. And how many times will they basically buy their way into putting out movies or hot sauce ranges or whatever else range is going to come out next. As I said, Nicola did put out that film that she did as Shane Dawson, and for her first project ever, she wrote, directed, and starred in it. And just like Shane Dawson, it did not get a lot of positive anything, box office or reviews. So these people do have endless money. So I guess we'll have to continue to hear from them as long as the media will continue to allow them to buy their way in, especially given that they not only have famous lawyers, but also ruthless marketing and PR teams at their beck and call. Maybe in the future, I'll do a behind the scenes video of the Spice Girls. Let me know if that's one you'd want to see. I have a ton of videos coming that I'm really excited to make, especially some of the behind the scenes of TV shows those are my favorite ones to do. And I have a good few planned for the rest of 2025. And definitely a few shows that people have been asking about for a while. So if you'd like to see any of those, consider subscribing, but no pressure. Thank you so much for being here and making it to the end. If you did make it to the end, leave MVP below so I can personally thank you. I've left my Patreon, all of my socials, all of Miss G's socials, along with the sources in the description box and the pinned comment. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, make sure to stay safe, take care of yourselves, and G and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye, guys.